welcome. You're watching Medically Speaking, and I am Meenakshi Ukreti. Today, we will be talking about long COVID. Omicron wave almost over. The number of cases are down. They're reducing with each passing day. But what does this mean for you and me? Many of us, many of our viewers watching the show did catch the Omicron virus. Many of us had been infected in the Delta wave, many twice or even thrice. But what effect does it have on our bodies in the long term? That's something which we will be analyzing in next 20 minutes or so. And to help us understand this better, we have a collaboration with Sarvodaya Hospital. I'd like to welcome panelists from the same hospital, starting with Dr. Amit Kumar. He's a senior consultant of cardiology at the hospital. Also, Dr. Sunil Rana, he's a senior consultant internal medicine from Sarvodaya Hospital. And very shortly, Dr. Manisha Mehendirata will be joining us. She is the HOD and senior consultant respiratory medicine at the Sarvodaya Hospital. I'm going to start first of all with you, Dr. Rana. Since you're handling internal medicine, you must have seen a lot of cases firsthand. That's when they're first reported. Are you seeing, sir, any cases of long COVID? Are there patients who are returning back to you, perhaps cured of Omicron or the Delta virus?
Definitely, we are seeing a lot of cases post-COVID. So post-COVID is a very difficult task actually, because the COVID virus is going to put a lot of pressure on your body. It's going to take a toll on your immune system. So most of the patients are presenting with a weakness, fatigability, decreased sleep. That is a most, and some psychological, because for the last 3 years, people are retaining at the home. They are restraining themselves to the home. So definitely it's going to put pressure on your mental balance also. So psychological problems are very common post-COVID.
Right, psychological problems common post-COVID, but what about the heart? We also have Dr. Kumar, senior cardiologist of the Sarvodaya Hospital with us. Dr. Kumar, help us understand. When, the Delta wave had happened, all of us were checking CRP levels, D-dimers. There were reports coming in of blood thickness due to COVID and many heart attacks also happening. Even post the recovery phase, are we seeing any long-term effect on the human heart due to COVID? Are you personally seeing such cases, sir?
You have rightly touched the topic. So, COVID has got very close interrelation with the heart. So, first thing is any patient who is of heart disease, he is at high risk when he contracts COVID. He or she contracts COVID. If he has got underlying heart problem, he is at high risk. So, as you already know, multiple comorbidities increase the risk of COVID. Suppose a patient is having COPD, patient is having heart disease, patient is having liver disease, and then if he contracts COVID, then it becomes a high risk thing. Patient becomes high risk. So if there is underlying heart disease and the patient contracts COVID disease, then it becomes a high risk case, first of all. Secondly, we need to understand that COVID can affect the heart by itself and in many ways. So for example, COVID is an inflammatory state, and COVID can cause inflammation of the myocardium, which we call as myocarditis. So acute myocarditis is very commonly seen in patients with COVID. So there were many patients whose cardiac enzymes were raised and they were not having any blockages in their heart, but the cardiac enzymes were raised, mean to say that the heart was inflamed. So any inflammation of the heart can give rise to the risk of arrhythmias. So many patients were developing AF, atrial tachycardia, atrial flutter, and some of them, unfortunately, ventricular tachycardia and ventricular fibrillation, which was fatal for the patient. So myocarditis was one thing which was very commonly seen during COVID period. Secondly, many patients developed angina, not because of major blockages, but because of microvascular blockages. So microvascular circulation was getting blocked. So because of inflammation, small vessels of the heart, microcirculation, that was getting blocked, and that was giving rise to angina. And some patients had very florid ECG changes when they presented with chest pain. But on angiography, the arteries were open. So it was due to microvascular damage. Thirdly, any patient who was post-COVID and who was trying to resume physical activity, he was always at high risk. So we were always advising those patients who have recovered from COVID to slowly resume their activities, because any patient who has recovered from myocarditis, if he resumes physical activity, strenuous physical activity, he may land up into arrhythmias, which can be fatal.
Right, and we also have Dr. Manisha who's joined us. Ma'am, help us understand, since we are in the middle of a discussion regarding long COVID, as far as the respiratory tract is concerned, we all know how it affects our lungs, but does it leave any long-term impact? We've discussed, of course, heart-specific, overall, what have been the long-term COVID effects, but what are you seeing in your field, ma'am? Shed a little more light on the same.
See, as we have noticed that the main way of transmission and the organs which were affected in COVID were the lungs, the respiratory tract. And so we had so many long haulers, we call patients who have post-COVID lung sequelae. That means most of the time, yes, cardiac involvement was there, the general symptoms are there, since the main target organ was lungs. So most of the patients who have recovered from mild disease or moderate to severe COVID, they had lung fibrosis. So what does lung fibrosis causes? Lung fibrosis is lung ka secunda. And since the capacity of the lung decreases, the patient is unable to breathe properly. The lung capacities are compromised as per the severity of the COVID involvement at the time of the disease. And since the lung capacities are compromised, patient may not be able to breathe properly. He may not be able to generate oxygen for the body, and so patient will have oxygen requirement for long. The patient might go into lung fibrosis or the lung shrinkage, but which is usually the lung fibrosis is irreversible in most of the conditions. But in last 1.5 years, even we have evolved during the different ways. We have seen that most of fibrosis the lung was reversible. So initially, a patient, if he had just lung capacities of 20 to 20%, by the end of 1 year or 16 months, the lung has improved significantly. But then the symptoms of breathlessness. Yes, please.
Yes, so symptoms continued. Take this forward. Dr. Rana, you were telling us about overall effects of long COVID, and we were discussing how people should, train themselves from indulging in strenuous physical activity right after recovery from COVID. What will be your suggestion to those who have just recovered from the virus? Most of us, of course, got the Omicron virus, which was rather milder in nature, and people have dismissed it as something not to really bother with. What would be your advice to those who have very recently recovered from Omicron and had very mild symptoms, perhaps?
So most of the time, because the Omicron was on the milder form, but still I told you ki it can issues also. So definitely we should have to be more involved. We should, if we are saying something like we are having a signs of the symptoms of the depression, then we should definitely get in touch with the psychiatrist to evaluate ourselves. That is the one thing we should do. And the another thing is for the fatigability, that is gradually going to go with the time. So we should not worry about that, but we should avoid doing any strenuous exercise. We should gradually improve our stamina, and then we should gradually increase our workload. That is the thing. And the another thing you were saying, we are talking about the effect on the heart. So definitely there is an entity which is called as postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So it's very common post-COVID. I myself suffer from the COVID, so I know the things. There is a lot of tachycardia, there is a lot of brain fog, there is a lot of confusion, dizziness post-COVID because of this syndrome, and you may have a tachycardia for a longer period. It may persist for at least a year. So the most of the
All right, there seemed to be some network trouble there with Dr. Rana, but we'll come back to you, sir. Point taken. Mind, lung, and heart. There are various aspects, various organs of the body which get affected post-COVID as well. Your recovery from COVID is not the end of the story. Dr. Amit Kumar, sir, we extensively were discussing with you the long COVID effect on the heart. Is it only for the comorbid? Who should really worry about their heart health post-recovering from COVID? Should the vaccinated, should those who have had milder symptoms, is there anything for them to worry about, or can they just, the very next day they recover, go back to life as usual, as many of us have been doing? Any precautions you would recommend, sir?
It is not like that only comorbid people are at high risk. Even very young people, people without any comorbidity, they all are at high risk. Because as I've already said, that myocarditis, that inflammation of the heart can affect anyone, first of all. And secondly, if the patient had myocarditis or inflammation of the heart, whenever he resumes strenuous activity, especially if he resumes strenuous activity very early in the course or very early after recovery, he is at high risk of developing arrhythmias, and some people have developed sudden cardiac death as well. So we have seen many patients who are quite young and they have resumed their physical activity very early in the recovery, and they developed sudden cardiac death, and some of them could not be revived even. So it is not that only comorbid people have to be cautious. Everyone, even youngsters, even people who are 22, 28, 30 years of age, they should also be very wary of starting their physical activity, and should be graduated physical activity. Slowly they should increase their physical activity.
Hmm.
So
Graded response and graded increase of physical activities, what you would recommend? Dr. Mehendi Lata, to come in the conversation here, ma'am. As far as the effect of COVID on lungs is concerned, the reality of today's life is also the sort of lifestyles which we lead. Smoking, is quite prevalent in urban areas. Those who have recovered from COVID, what would you recommend or advise to them? Many of my own friends, people I know personally, quitting smoking after recovering from COVID. Of course, it's put some sort of fear into their minds. What would you like to tell who have probably recovered from COVID and have fallen back to their older ways, thinking that right now the variant which is prevalent is anyway mild? So anyway, it's almost tantamount or similar to a common cold and flu, ma'am.
So yes, it was milder form. The lungs were spared this time, but patients who had worsened to the moderate or severe form, most of them were the patients who had compromised lung. So a pre-existing compromised lung would always be more dangerous for any type of viral infection. Fortunately or unfortunately, the COVID has made people conscious about their immunity, their respiratory system, the breathing exercises, the yogas, the antioxidants, and the take-home message should be like, they should work on it for long. It is not a temporary phase. This is one virus. Again, we can have another mutated virus. So your body in itself, with the immunity, with the lungs, you should have a strong immune system, strong healthy body to tolerate any kind of viral infection. Specifically, respiratory are the most delicate type and the most lethal type of infection. So smoking in itself, otherwise also we are staying in a place which is very much polluted. So patients who are not even smoking, the exposure of pollution is sufficient enough to cause lung damage, which is unavoidable. So at least we should avoid the toxic inhalations by ourselves.
And if you look at the brighter side, if nothing, this pandemic has made us more conscious of our immunity and, of course, of increasing our immunity to fight, of course, these diseases further. Dr. Rana, as you know, we're almost concluding the conversation, sir. We're speaking of a mild COVID, and that is when people leave or put their guards down. And that's exactly what we are seeing. The masks have almost gone down. The government says remove restrictions because the cases are down. It's mild anyway. Would you say that the mild theory is also making people complacent?
Definitely, the COVID, these things which are there in the news, they are going to make the people more complacent. We should not be complacent about the things, because the virus can mutate anytime and it can become a severe form also. So we should have to follow the guidelines which have been told to us, like wearing the mask is very important. Maintaining a distance of 1 meter is very important. You should always do that. Or gathering in a very closed spaces, or where there are a lot of people, should be avoided for the time being until we get.
Right, close gatherings should be avoided. Masks should be worn. Precautions must be followed. Dr. Kumar, very quick question to you, sir. Earlier, in the last two phases, we had seen people, of course, going for their markers check after recovery, like D-dimer, CRP, etc. People were getting this assessed and analyzed. That seems to have been forgotten totally. Would you say that it's a little unnecessary, or would you still recommend a continuation of the same, Dr. Kumar?
Patient should not take the call by himself. He should be in loop with the doctor. And if the doctor thinks that D-dimer or prolonged monitoring is required, then only monitoring should be done. Patient should not be taking the shots. Patient should not be taking the decisions. Let the doctor take the call. No, but the patient who has recovered from COVID should be, for next 3-4 weeks at least, should be in loop with the doctor, especially a pulmonologist must be in loop. And if the doctor advises that certain test needs to be done, then it should be done. But the bottom line is, the key word is caution. So if the patient is cautious, is in a loop with the doctor, then I think things should be much better.
Right. Last question, Dr. Mehta, we're running out of time, ma'am. Caution, the keyword really emerging. If we see the other fellow panelists also, caution to avoid getting COVID, caution if you do get COVID, and caution for a week or two post your recovery as well, ma'am. Would you also agree with these concluding remarks?
Definitely, caution is important. But then, personally, I feel life should get back to normalcy. We cannot be in mask. We cannot maintain social distancing for the lifetime. See, but the patient should have an insight. Since the patient should have an insight, every individual has a social responsibility, and if he feels he's having any symptom of cough, running nose, fever, he himself should isolate, mask, stay away from social distancing. If you want me to say that it should be universally applicable, I would disagree on that.
Well, the number of cases are going down, and I agree with you. Cannot be in perpetual lockdown. Perhaps end of the day, the responsibility lies with every individual citizen. Wear a mask if you do have symptoms. Avoid, of course, going in larger gathering. That really is a message emanating from the panel today. I'd like to thank all the three eminent doctors who did join us and Sarvodaya Hospital for collaborating with us and increasing awareness around COVID, around especially long COVID. I'd like to wish all our viewers, we really hope that they all are healthy. As of now, thank you, all the doctors, for joining us on the broadcast.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.